On my 66th birthday, my own daughter handed me a wrapped box in front of 20 guests standing in her living room. Inside that box was a one-way plane ticket. She told me to have a good flight, smiling like she had just handed me the best gift of my life. Her husband laughed right there with cake still on his plate. What none of them knew, what nobody standing in that house had the first idea about, was that 2 months earlier I had inherited $27 million, and I hadn't said one word about it to a living soul. My name is Earl Jennings, I'm 66 years old, and I spent most of my working life fixing transmissions and timing belts in a small shop off Airport Highway in Toledo, Ohio. This is the story of what happened after that birthday, and what I did the week after that none of them saw coming. Before I get into what happened, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments, I always like knowing who's listening. Alright, let's get into it. I need to back up a little so the rest of this makes sense. My wife Loretta passed away 4 years ago from cancer, and after the funeral the house on Maple Hollow Street felt too big and too quiet for one man to be rattling around in. I'd walk past her sewing room some mornings and just stand there a minute, like the silence itself had weight to it, like it was something I had to push through to get to the kitchen. My daughter Renee lived about 20 minutes across town with her husband Brett and their 2 kids, Cole and Grace. She told me I shouldn't be alone in that big old house. She said family takes care of family, and that I should sell the place and move in with them. I believed her, and honestly I wanted to believe her, because Loretta was gone and I didn't much feel like spending my evenings talking to an empty kitchen. So I sold the house on Maple Hollow Street that fall. It brought in a fair amount of money, and I used a good chunk of it, $165,000, to help Renee and Brett with the down payment on a bigger place out on Birchwood Court. The kind of house with a real yard for the grandkids to run around in. My old friend Ray Kowalski, a lawyer I'd known since high school, drew up a simple promissory note for that money, just so everything was clean and on paper, the way Loretta always insisted we handle things, even between family. I moved into the finished basement of that house, hung a few of my old tools on a pegboard down there just so it would feel a little like myself. I paid them $550 a month toward groceries and utilities, drove Cole and Grace to school most mornings, and never once asked for anything more than a place at the table. I even retiled the basement bathroom myself over a couple of weekends, new fixtures and everything, all out of my own pocket, because I figured if I was going to live there, I ought to make it feel like a real home instead of a storage room with a bed shoved in the corner. I thought that was what family looked like. The first year down there was fine, might even say it was good. The second year, things started feeling different, though nobody ever came out and said so directly. Brett would mention, almost joking, standing at the kitchen counter, that the water bill had crept up since I moved in, like I was running the shower for an hour, instead of the 10 minutes I actually took most mornings. Renee was busy with her job at a marketing firm downtown, and always seemed worn out by the time she got home, dropping her bag by the door and heading straight upstairs, too tired to sit and talk the way we used to back when Loretta was alive, and kept the whole house talking over supper. The grandkids were the one bright spot in all of it. Grace, who was 8, would come padding down to the basement most evenings in her socks, plop herself in the old recliner, and tell me every last detail about her day at school whether I'd asked or not. Cole, 15, and mostly glued to his phone, still came down when he needed help with his algebra, because I was better with fractions and equations than either of his parents, and he'd sit at my little folding table until the numbers finally made sense to him. But between Renee and Brett, I started noticing something I couldn't quite put a name to. I wasn't part of conversations the way I used to be. I'd hear the 2 of them talking low in the kitchen some nights, their voices dropping off whenever I came up the stairs for a glass of water. I told myself I was imagining it, told myself grief makes a man see shadows where there aren't any, so I kept driving the kids to school, kept paying my $550 on the first of every month, told myself that was enough to earn my place in that house. Then on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of winter, my phone rang with a Dallas area code I didn't recognize while I was folding laundry down in the basement. The man on the other end introduced himself as Marcus Whitlow, an attorney out of Dallas, and he told me my brother Dale had passed away from a heart attack the week before. Alone in his house, found by a neighbor 2 days later, I had to sit down on the edge of the bed when he told me that part. I hadn't spoken to Dale in about 18 years. We'd had a falling out over how to handle our father's care in his last years, said some things to each other neither of us ever fully took back, and neither of us ever picked up a phone to fix it. I always figured there'd be time later. There wasn't. Dale had never remarried after his divorce, never had kids of his own, and had built a company called Crosspoint Industrial Supply from almost nothing into a business worth tens of millions of dollars, providing equipment and staffing to oil and gas operations across 3 states. Mr. Whitlow told me that as Dale's only living relative, I was the sole heir to his entire estate. The company, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, every bit of it. Once everything cleared probate, he estimated the total value at somewhere around $27 million. I sat in my truck in the driveway on Birchwood Court for almost an hour after that call, not moving, just listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. I wasn't thinking about the money yet. I was thinking about a brother I'd lost twice, once to an argument neither one of us ever mended, and now for good. I didn't go inside and tell Renee and Brett. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there in the quiet, grieving a man I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 decades, trying to work out what any of it meant. Over the next 2 months, I handled things quietly on the side, using the computer at the branch library some afternoons so nobody at home would start asking questions. I hired a Toledo estate attorney named Linda Osei, sharp and no-nonsense, recommended by Ray, and she helped me set up a trust to hold everything Dale had left behind, kept completely separate from my day-to-day life on Birchwood Court. I didn't change how I lived in that house one bit, still paid my $550 a month, still drove the kids to school every morning at 7:15, still slept in that basement under the same old quilt Loretta had sewn years before. Part of that was grief, not being ready to think about spending Dale's money on myself, but part of it, if I'm honest, was that I wanted to see how my daughter and her husband treated me, while they still believed I had nothing but my pension and a little savings in the bank. While I was going through the paperwork on Crosspoint Industrial Supply with Linda one afternoon in her office downtown, I came across something that stopped me cold. The company had a regional office right there in Toledo, and one of the operations managers on the payroll sheet was Brett Sawyer, my son-in-law. He'd worked there 6 years, and he had no idea the company writing his paycheck now quietly belonged, through a trust, to me. Linda explained the ownership was structured privately enough that nobody at the Toledo office would ever connect Earl Jennings, the retired mechanic living in a basement, to the new majority shareholder listed only under the trust's name. I didn't say a word to Brett about it, just folded that piece of information up quietly in my mind and kept living my ordinary life down in that basement, waiting to see what would happen next. As winter turned to spring, the comments at home got sharper, less like jokes and more like decisions already being made out loud. Brett started saying, in that half-joking tone people use when they mean something completely, that the basement would make a fine home gym once I didn't need it anymore, usually while flipping through some fitness catalog at the kitchen table. Renee brought up more than once over dinner that her friend Denise had just moved her own father into an assisted living community down in Arizona, and how peaceful Denise said her house felt afterward, how much lighter everything seemed. She said it like idle conversation, but she said it 3 separate times inside of 1 month, and I wasn't imagining the pattern by then. I noticed other little things shifting around the house too. My mail started getting left on the counter instead of handed to me at the door, the way Grace always used to do it. Dinner portions got a touch smaller on nights I came down late from picking up a prescription. Nobody asked me to family movie night anymore, not even Grace, though I suspect that wasn't really her call to make. Brett started leaving the real estate section folded open on the kitchen table some mornings, listing circled in pen, and I never once asked him who those houses were meant for, though I had a fair idea. My 66th birthday was coming up in September, and Renee told me she was planning something special, inviting the neighbors and Brett's parents in from Phoenix. I wanted to believe that meant they still cared. Some part of me, the part that missed Loretta and missed being somebody's priority, chose to believe it anyway. Even with everything else I'd been quietly filing away for months without saying a word about any of it to anyone. By the time September rolled around, I had finished everything with Linda Osei. The trust was fully in place, the company ownership settled, and I had $27 million sitting quietly behind my name without a single person on Birchwood Court knowing a thing about it. I felt something close to peace about all of it. Whatever happened next, I had grieved my brother in my own way, handled his business the right way, the way he would have respected even if we never got to say so to each other's faces, and I had kept living exactly the same simple life I'd always lived in that basement. Renee seemed genuinely excited about the party that week, running around the house picking out decorations, ordering a cake from the bakery on Sylvania Avenue that Loretta used to love, the one with the little sugar flowers on top. Brett's parents flew in from Phoenix the Friday before. A dozen neighbors from up and down Birchwood Court were invited, along with a couple of Renee's old college friends. Grace helped me pick out balloons at the party store, holding up different colors and asking which ones Grandma would have liked best. And that small thing alone kept my spirits up the whole week leading into it. I helped set up folding chairs in the backyard that Saturday morning, feeling something close to hope for the first time in a long while, thinking maybe things really were about to turn a corner between us, that this party was them finally remembering I was still their father, still part of this family, not just a line item in the monthly budget. I put on my good blue shirt that evening, the one Loretta always said, brought out my eyes, combed what was left of my hair, and walked into that living room ready to celebrate turning 66, surrounded by people I loved. The party went fine for the first hour. Folks ate cake off paper plates. The grandkids ran around the yard chasing the neighbor's dog. Brett's father told the same fishing story he tells every single time I've ever been in a room with him. Then Renee stood up near the fireplace and announced she had a special gift for me, something she'd been planning for weeks, her voice bright and pleased with itself. She handed me a wrapped box and the whole room went quiet, watching me untie the ribbon. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Bradenton, Florida, along with a glossy folded brochure for a discount senior living community, the kind with a stock photo of smiling strangers playing cards on the cover. She told me to have a good flight, still smiling, explaining to the room that she thought it was time I lived somewhere with people my own age, somewhere I could really relax, instead of being cooped up in a basement. Brett laughed out loud, actually laughed, and said something about finally getting his home gym, like he'd been waiting a year to say it. A few of the neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their folding chairs. Nobody said a word in my defense, not even Brett's mother, who at least had the decency to look down at her plate. I looked at that ticket for a long moment, feeling the thin paper between my fingers. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. I folded it carefully along its own crease, thanked Renee for thinking of me, and told the room the cake was excellent. Then I walked downstairs to my basement room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at that folded ticket for a long while, thinking about Loretta, thinking about Dale, thinking about $27 million sitting quietly in a trust that nobody in that house even knew existed. I didn't say goodbye to anyone that night. Once the last guest had left and the house went quiet, I packed one duffel bag with a few changes of clothes and my important papers, the folder Linda had given me, and I walked out the front door around 11 o'clock without turning on a single light. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note on the counter. I left the same quiet way I'd been living in that basement for 3 years, except this time, standing on that front porch, I knew I wasn't coming back. I checked into a hotel downtown near the Maumee River and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand, the ticket still folded up in my shirt pocket. I called Ray Kowalski a little after midnight and woke him up, told him everything that had happened at that party, every last detail, right down to Brett's laugh. Ray was quiet on the line a moment after I finished. Then he reminded me of something I'd half forgotten over the years, that the note on the Birchwood Court down payment had a clause in it. The $165,000 was set to be forgiven at $15,000 a year, but only as long as I was living in that home and being treated as family in good faith. Otherwise, the full remaining balance came due on demand with 30 days' notice. I sat with that information a long time that night, looking out the hotel window at the lights along the river. I wasn't angry, not in the way people usually picture anger. I was just done being surprised by things I should have seen coming a year off. The next morning, over a cup of hotel coffee that tasted like nothing, I called Linda Osei first and told her I was ready to fully step into everything Dale had left me. No more waiting around. Then I called Ray and asked him to draw up the paperwork on the note. There was still $135,000 remaining on that loan, and I told him I wanted a formal demand letter sent calling the balance due in full within 30 days, exactly as the note allowed under its own terms. Ray asked if I was sure if I wanted to sit on it a few more days before he filed anything. I told him I'd had 3 years to think it over, and one plane ticket to Florida had made the actual decision for me the night before. This wasn't about hurting anyone for the sake of hurting them. It was about a piece of paper they'd signed years ago with clear conditions attached. And those conditions weren't being met by anyone in that house anymore. I also learned from Linda that Crosspoint Industrial Supply had already been planning, long before Dale died, to consolidate its smaller regional offices, folding the Toledo operations into a larger branch down in Cincinnati to cut costs. It had nothing to do with me and nothing to do with Brett personally, just a business decision moving forward on its own schedule that the old board had been discussing in quarterly meetings since before I ever knew Dale's name was attached to any of it. I made a decision that morning that I wouldn't step in to stop it, And I wouldn't step in to save Brett's job either. I wasn't going to use my new position to hurt him on purpose, pulling strings just to watch him suffer. I just wasn't going to use it to protect him anymore either. Not after that ticket. Not after watching him laugh while I stood there holding it in front of 20 people. Exactly 1 week after my birthday, a process server knocked on the door at Birchwood Court at 10 in the morning and handed Renee a certified letter demanding repayment of $135,000 within 30 days. My phone started buzzing on the hotel nightstand within the hour, call after call. I let the first 4 go to voicemail while I finished my coffee downstairs at the hotel restaurant, watching traffic move along the street. When I finally picked up, Renee's voice was shaking. She wanted to know what the letter meant, said there had to be some mistake, that lawyers don't just show up at people's houses out of nowhere. I told her calmly there was no mistake, that Ray had drawn up that note years ago, exactly the way she and Brett had signed it, with conditions attached about how I was to be treated while I lived there. I told her the terms of that agreement hadn't been met, so the balance was simply due, plain and simple. Nothing personal about the timing of it. She asked how I could do this to my own daughter after everything I'd given them over the years. I reminded her, gently but plainly, that everything I'd given them had come with a piece of paper attached, drawn up by a real lawyer, signed by both of them at that same kitchen table, sitting in a filing cabinet for years waiting to matter. She went quiet on the line a moment, and I could hear Brett's voice somewhere behind her, muffled, asking who she was talking to. I told her I loved her and meant every word of it, but that loving someone doesn't mean letting them hand you a one-way ticket out of their life in front of 20 people and expecting nothing to change afterward. Then I told her I had somewhere to be, said I'd talk to her soon, and hung up gently, sitting there a minute afterward just listening to the quiet of the hotel room. 2 weeks after that letter arrived, the restructuring at Crosspoint Industrial Supply moved forward exactly as the old board had already planned it months before. The Toledo office got folded into Cincinnati, and Brett's position as regional operations manager was eliminated along with 4 others in a standard company-wide reduction, announced in an 11-minute meeting on a Friday afternoon. Brett had no idea then, and still doesn't fully know to this day, that his father-in-law had become the majority owner of the very company that had just let him go. He came home that Friday and told Renee he'd lost his job. 6 years of steady work gone in less time than it takes to eat lunch. Between that news and the demand letter for $135,000 sitting on their kitchen counter, the pressure in that house on Birchwood Court became something they couldn't quietly ignore anymore. Something that showed up in Renee's voice every time she called me that weekend. She called twice that Saturday, and I let both calls go to voicemail, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say to either of them yet, and I wasn't ready to pretend that I did. Ray told me later they'd tried talking to their bank about refinancing the house to cover the note, but with Brett suddenly unemployed and no new job lined up, nobody wanted to extend them fresh credit. The house on Birchwood Court, the one my $165,000 had helped them buy in the first place, was now the only real asset standing between them and that debt, and everyone in that house knew it by then. Brett spent that whole week sending out resumes at the kitchen table, the same table where Renee had unwrapped that box just weeks before. Ray said the mood in that house shifted from confusion to something closer to real panic once both problems landed in the same week. About 3 weeks after the party, Renee showed up at my hotel unannounced on a Tuesday evening, standing in the lobby looking like she hadn't slept properly in days, her coat buttoned crooked. She apologized, actually apologized, said she never should have handed me that ticket in front of everyone, that it had been more Brett's idea than hers, and that she'd gone along with it because she was tired and stressed about money and just wanted the basement back for themselves. She asked if there was any way I could forgive the loan, or at least give them more time now that Brett didn't have a job to fall back on. I listened to all of it without interrupting, let her get every word out. When she finished, I told her I appreciated her coming to say that, and I meant it. But I told her the truth too, that for 3 years I had felt more like a tenant paying rent than a father living with his own family, and that the birthday party had simply confirmed what I'd already started suspecting for months before it ever happened. I told her I wasn't trying to punish her, but I also wasn't going to pretend that letter didn't exist just because things had suddenly gotten hard for them. Through Ray, I agreed to give them an extra 30 days on the repayment deadline. Nothing more than that. I didn't forgive the debt. I didn't call anyone at Crosspoint Industrial Supply to try and get Brett his old job back. I told Renee some things a person has to work through on their own, the same way I'd had to work through my own life after that party. Alone in a hotel room at 66 years old with nobody checking on me, by early winter, I had bought myself a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet part of Toledo near Ottawa Park, paid for in cash. Nothing flashy, just comfortable, with a back porch that caught good morning light. I reconnected with a few old friends from my years running the shop, guys I hadn't sat down with in ages, and we started meeting for coffee most Thursday mornings at a diner on Erie Street, trading old stories the way we used to before life got busy and complicated. It felt good to be somewhere I wasn't paying rent for a place at the table. I also went back to Linda Osei and set up a separate education trust, funded directly for Cole and Grace. Money that would go straight toward their college tuition someday, completely outside anything Renee or Brett could ever touch or control themselves. I wanted my grandkids taken care of properly. I just didn't want that care running through people who had shown me exactly what they were willing to do, the moment things got inconvenient for them. One evening that November, my phone rang, and it was Grace calling from Renee's cell, her voice bright and rushed the way 8-year-olds talk when they're excited about something. She just wanted to tell me about a school project she'd finished on the solar system, not asking for anything, not knowing a thing about lawyers or demand letters or lost jobs. She just missed her grandpa and wanted to talk about Saturn's rings for 20 straight minutes. I sat on my new back porch listening to her go on, and for the first time since that birthday party, I felt something in my chest loosen just a little, remembering that not everyone in that family had seen me the way Renee and Brett had. Birchwood Court went on the market that December. Renee and Brett couldn't refinance it, couldn't cover the note any other way, so they sold it, paid off what they owed me in full, and moved into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment closer to Brett's new job, a lower-paying position he eventually found at a logistics company across town. I didn't gloat about any of it, didn't call to check on how the sale went or ask about the new apartment. Ray handled the final paperwork quietly, and that was the end of that particular chapter between us. Renee and I talk now every couple of weeks. Careful conversations over the phone, nothing like what we used to have back when Loretta was alive and keeping us all close, but something real, something honest at least. She's never once mentioned Florida or that plane ticket again, and I've never brought it up either, and I don't plan to. I still see Cole and Grace regularly, on my own terms now, picking them up for dinner some Sundays at that diner on Erie Street, and Grace still calls just to talk about her day, not because she needs anything from me. I sit on my back porch most evenings now, in the house I bought with my brother's money and my own hard-earned peace of mind, watching the light change over the trees near the park, and I think about how strange it is that losing Dale, a brother I hadn't spoken to in almost 18 years, ended up teaching me more about who truly wanted me around than 3 years of living under my own daughter's roof ever did. I'm not bitter about how things turned out, and I don't spend my evenings replaying that birthday party looking for something new to be angry about. I'm just finally, for the first time in a long time, exactly where I want to be.